The land moved first. A black arroyo woke under a sky the color of iron, and the sound was teeth, stones grinding, water chewing. A wind came off the mesas so cold it stole the breath from a throat before a person could say a prayer. In that sound and cold, June Mallory lifted one boot from the sucking mud and put it down again, feeling the earth want her ankle like a mouth. The pack mule pulled against her rope and skittered sideways. "Easy," she whispered, and the word puffed like steam and vanished. Ahead, a man in a torn buckskin shirt turned his face into the needles of rain. His hair was unbraided, wind lashed. He walked without hurry, reading the ground as if the ground spoke to him. "Dasan," people said in low tones, the outcast Chiricahua who'd taken a rifle bullet meant for a chief and lived to be blamed for it. June had only 2 hours of his company, but already believed the part about being blamed. The arroyo widened into a bowl. The water there didn't ripple. It muscled past, brown and glossy and full of bones and branches. A light wagon lay on its side, 2 wheels showing like ribs. June had to reach it. The wagon held her winter flour, her tools, and a ledger wrapped in oilcloth that men would kill for, because the missing line wasn't missing yet. "Now," Dasan said, and pointed with his chin. "If we cross at the head cut, before the water learns to turn." June nodded, then flinched. The ground under her hissed. The mule dropped, knees locked, and sank to its pasterns. Quicksand, just off the lip, where a little tributary fed the big. Her rope went tight and burned a groove in her glove. "Cliff," she breathed, because it felt like falling. Dasan was already moving. He kicked a length of dead root toward her, then knelt and pressed his palm to the sand. "Don't pull," he said. "Splay your weight. Give the earth your whole body, not just the bottom of your boots." June flattened, belly to the wet grit, breath in a ragged rhythm. She reached for the mule's halter, fingers numb, and slid the root beneath the rope, a poor man's spreader bar. "Easy, Hob," she told the animal, and the mule's rolling eye flicked to her voice. She could feel suction on her boots. One more wrong move, and she would not walk out of this. A shot cracked from the far rim, a dry pop inside the rain. Dust jumped at Dasan's heel where the bullet struck high ground. June tasted metal, some old memory of blood, human intent, bright as a knife. "Company," Dasan said, calm as a tired teacher. He slid a coil of his own line from his shoulder, a rope with a maker's braid June had never seen, tight and flat like a river stone, and cast to her with a subtle underhand. He anchored the other end around a root and his body, both. "Stand when I stand," he called. "If we go together." June rose as the mule heaved. The root creaked. Her left boot came free. The right stuck and tore, boot leather giving, up its shape around her ankle with a sucking pop. She stumbled, saved the mule's eye with her hand, and then they were back on crust, water riffles licking at the edge where she had been. Another shot, a spark from a stone. The shooter did not rush. A patient angle, a hunter who had slept well. Dasan's gaze tracked the rim. He said, "They aren't here to waste bullets. They want you frightened back to the ford where it's easier to take you." June swallowed rain. "They want the wagon. They want what's in your head." He looked at her as if measuring how much of her would live to speak it. Then his eye cut to the broken wagon. "We don't have long. The water is learning to turn." June could not look at the wagon without seeing the ledger inside it. She had sharpened her pencil on Sunday nights for 6 months, writing brands and birth names, dates and marks, like knots in a life. Her husband had said brands were truth on a hide when men forgot their promises. Her husband was not here to say anything now. The ledger wasn't hers by law, not truly, but it was the only page in the territory that could prove whose cattle walked, under which stars, and one line in it, one line she had written with her own left hand, looking over her shoulder at a lantern guttering on a clay wall, could burn a rich man down to ash, if the page survived the water. June lifted her head. On the far rim, a horseman eased into view, rain stinging his hat brim. He wore a slicker that glowed oil black and fine leather leggings. He did not lift his rifle again. He only looked, decided how frightened she was, and touched 2 fingers to the brim in a little salute that meant he believed this was already done. Under his horse's saddle skirt, June saw a brand burned into the hide, a ewe lying on its back with a split tail, the kind you could shift into a different letter with a bar in the right place. Her stomach went cold. "I know that mark," she said. "You should," Dasan answered. "It's the mark on the beef that feeds soldiers at Fort Stanton this winter." He bent, scooped a palm of mud, and rubbed it on the rope to give it grip, and on many animals that never saw the company fence. June's breath ran short. The burned ledger line. If she said it aloud now, if a bullet took her while the syllables were still warm in the air, then the truth would die smaller than a fly. She bit her lip and tasted. She didn't know if it was blood or rain. "Move," Dasan said. "We cross now or we never cross." They went down into the bowl together, leaning like trees in the wind. The arroyo growled. A log slid past, all beard of roots, then spun and vanished into a brown heave. June saw the shape of a woman's bonnet for an instant, a white ghost sewn from foam, and snapped her eyes away, because looking at it too long made it true. They reached the wagon. Dasan dug his heel into a seam of gravel and braced. June waded to the bed and shoved the oilcloth bundle free. The current tugged her coat sideways. Pain lit behind her left knee like a match when she twisted. The horseman on the rim shifted in the saddle, considering the shot again. He did not take it. His patience had the weight of a contract. June threw the oilcloth to Dasan. He caught it one-handed and wedged it high in a fork of root above the floodline. "Another," he said, because the bundle was wrong light for the thing that would change an empire of beef. "Where's the other?" June closed her eyes and saw the page. Not inside the oilcloth at all. Wrapped in waxed muslin and stitched into the hem of the wagon canvas. The day she heard a rumor that fire had a way of choosing its own roads when the company men were angry. She groped for the canvas in the cold, and her fingers found stitches, like the teeth of a smile. Above, a second rider joined the first, and these 2 were followed by a third, leading a riderless pony. The third man loosed a coiled rope, let it dangle and swing, the loop opening like a hungry mouth. He wanted her alive. June cut the stitches with her pocket knife. The page slid out, heavy, oil dark, waxed against a day like this, and in her hands it felt like both a sin and a sacrament. She pressed it under her shirt, skin to skin. The cold said nothing and everything to her bones. The water broke over her thigh, and she gasped. "June," Dasan said, her name a calm shore. "You have the thing?" "I have the thing. We go." They went, turning into the current, giving their bodies to its anger and asking it to spend itself on them, and not on the page. June's boots found a stone, then another. The mule thrummed with fear, but followed the rope. Dasan put himself between June and the weight of the water, his back a shield she hadn't asked for. On the rim, the man in the black slicker looked down again, and June thought she knew him even with the rain blurring his face. Clayton Pike, the buyer of debts he never meant to forgive, the one who had said, smooth as cream, that a widow alone could always find a way to repay if she loved her husband's memory enough. He lifted his hand and tilted it. A little wave. "We see you. We count you." June's foot slipped. Her knee buckled. The current shouldered her hip. She went on her hands. The page under her shirt crinkled. Dasan reached and caught her collar with a fist that burned like a brand. They climbed the far bank on hands and knees. The 3 riders sat their horses above. patient as stones set by a river last spring. June's lungs clawed for air. Her heart hit the inside of its cage like it wanted out. Dasan stood slow. He put his hand out not to the riders, but to June, palm up, asking without words, "You come with me out of this bowl and into the hard country where I can do something besides die with you." "I'll fight till my bones break," June whispered. The words were colder than the rain. She surprised herself with how much truth was in them. Dasan's mouth tilted, the first ghost of a smile since she had met him. "Can you love a broken man?" he asked. The wind took the question and dragged it across the arroyo like a piece of tin. June did not know if the Apache meant himself or every man who had touched her life and left a bruise on it. June looked up at Pike, the slicker dripping, the rope loop swinging by the third rider's knee, and thought of the single line in her ledger that could make a gallows creak for the right person. Then she looked at Dasan's hand and took it with her wet, shaking fingers. "Come on," she said to the mule and to her own legs. Up on the rim, Pike turned his horse and began to walk the lip of the arroyo toward the narrow place, toward the ford the flood had not yet remembered. He meant to take them in a notch where the land had taught men for generations that choke points were easy places to stop a life. "Viewer," the narrator's voice would say if the voice was a person, "you might be watching from a city where rivers obey stone walls. Out here, water takes what it wants. Tell us where you're watching from, and when we reach the coal shelf called Widow's Step, you'll know why Dasan never spoke his brother's real name." The day before the flood, June Mallory had argued with a stove. The stove won. It smoked, then sulked, then came back hot enough to warp the tin coffee pot. And all of that felt like good practice for a conversation with a debt man. The cabin had been her husband's father's place once, then hers, in all but papers. The papers remained in county hands, and those hands worked for Clayton Pike. She wiped a black streak off her cheek with the back of her wrist, then reached for the coffee and did not drink. Coffee made a person too honest. A runner from the road hammered at her door twice, then used his boot as if the extra noise built a case. June opened. A boy of maybe 14 stood there with a letter he did not own and eyes that had learned to be old. He wore a hat too big for his head and a scarf tied with a knot. June's man had called a teamster's lie, a knot that looked secure and wasn't if you knew where to pull. "From Pike," the boy said, and flinched when he said the name. "Come in," June said. "I can't," the boy answered, and his eyes flicked half a length past her shoulder to the corner where her husband's old rifle leaned. "Counting keeps me in a place." "Who taught you that kind of counting?" June asked. But the boy was already walking backward like a person who believed the earth would seize him if he turned. June put the letter on the table and did not open it until she had washed her hands and tied her hair back and tucked the kettle aside. The letter smelled faintly of a man's sweat and the sweet tallow the county clerk used to keep his fingers from sticking to pages. She read it once without breathing, then again, slower. "You are in arrears. The homestead transfer delayed on account of non-payment. The cattle contract void if delivery can't be reasonably expected by first thaw. Your wagon and its contents remain as collateral on account of the disputed ledger." Disputed. A good word if you wanted to make a truth sound optional. June went outside and breathed the cold until it froze her throat easy. Snow had rained 2 days ago and worn a thin skin of ice in the night. Now the skin glittered and softened, and that was how flood begins. Her husband had always watched the sky with a farmer's narrowed eye. She watched the ground. Inside, June wrapped the ledger in oilcloth and thought of where a person hides the one page a man like Pike wants most. She heard herself say aloud, in a voice that would not sound afraid, "In the canvas hem." She stitched until the light was wrong. until her fingers burned and her eyes saw lines that were not there. She tied off the thread with a tack knot, the kind her father had taught her on a fishing line, a knot that locked hard and flat and lay quiet along an edge. She did not say her husband's name while she worked. She had learned that much of her neighbor's etiquette. The dead don't need to answer to our tongues. They know who they are in the next place. Under the ledger she lay a beaded token tied to a scrap of worn leather. It had come to her in a basket with her husband's body a year ago. 2 narrow rows of beads, blue and white, in a storm pattern she did not know how to read. No one had claimed it. No one had told her who sent it. June didn't wear it because it wasn't hers. She kept it under the ledger because it made her feel watched by someone who didn't hate her. A rider came mid-afternoon, hat brim straight, coat too fine for the day. He didn't dismount. Clayton Pike had a way of turning even a horse into a law. "You have a page I need," he said by way of greeting. "You'll need more than needing to get it." June stood in the doorway because doors make smaller targets and bigger statements. He tipped his head as if she had said a clever thing. "You know, Mrs. Mallory, people like us don't have disputes. We have understandings." "People like us?" she asked, hearing the crack in her voice and hating it. "People who want to sleep dry, eat warm, and not answer questions they can't afford to." His horse stamped. The day felt like a kettle, waiting for the lid to rattle. Pike's eyes flicked to the wagon under the lean-to. "That ledger belongs to the county until we decide whose it is." "You don't mean the county." "Names are hats," he said and smiled. "Wear whichever looks honest today. Take your hat and go." Pike's smile narrowed to a line you could shave with. "First thaw, Mrs. Mallory. That's Sunday next. You deliver 20 head branded proper, or I take the wagon and the stove and the 4 walls around you. There's a paper says I can." "The papers." "Neighbors won't argue. My husband worked for the company 3 winters," June said. "He wrote the brands into that book with his own hand. There's a mark in there you don't want read," she added, and watched him for the flinch that would tell her she had guessed right. He did not flinch. He breathed, slow as church. "You've been listening to the wrong men," he said, "or the right men too late." When he rode away, the light came down wrong, and June realized she had been holding herself like a chair someone else owned. She let her shoulders fall and went to the wagon and touched the canvas hem where her stitches lay. At dusk, a stranger came walking. He didn't raise his hands, didn't hurry. He stepped like a man who had learned to make himself the second most interesting thing in a landscape. He wore a buckskin shirt that had seen 2 owners and a winter. His hair lay tangled on his shoulders. He stopped at the edge of her yard and waited as if he had learned patience as a kind of work. "You go?" he asked finally, chin flicking at the wagon, at the road just then turning to glass under a new skin of ice. "I go," June said, and his voice surprised her. It wasn't the gravel kind men put on when they wanted to sound dangerous. It was ordinary and tired. "You're on foot," she added. "I'm out." He touched his chest once, lightly, where a man might touch a medicine kept in a pocket. "Where I came from, I am out." He looked past her at the stove. "Your house leaks at the eave. If you go, the water will put out your fire, and the ice will live here until noon tomorrow. You should take your fire with you." "My fire is my problem," June said. "You warm from it?" "I warm outside it." He nodded as if she had answered a question he'd asked before. "You should leave now. The headwater broke a ridge of ice 2 hours ago. When it gets here, the ground won't know which shape to take." "Who taught you the ground?" June asked, and meant to make it sound like a small joke. It did not sound like a joke. "My brother," he said. "Once." The word once hung between them and made a cold that wasn't weather. June did not step closer because men sometimes mistake that for invitation they didn't earn. She said, "If I take you up, what do you cost?" I cost nothing. Later I will cost a choice. He looked at the wagon canvas as if he could see through it to the hem that held a page. You will pay that choice anyway. With me, you will see it sooner. Who are you? She asked. Dasan, he said. I will say no other name today. June breathed the air and felt ice making a plan in it. All right, Dasan. You walk. You steer the mule. If you take anything we didn't agree, I cut you. If I stumble, I pull, he said simply. They went. Moonlight came thin through blistered cloud. The road bent along a wash where willow roots hung like old hair. The sound under the crust grew. June thought of the rule she had learned from two different neighbors who didn't speak to one another. You don't say the names of the dead, and you don't tell a man what price you will pay until you are at the table. She owed both rules and would pay them. At the first ford, the ice sang. It was not a pretty sound. It had within it a child crying alone and an axe on nail and the way a person's breath turns to glass in the lungs before it shatters. June saw a print in the mud where the road leaned in, a fresh shoe with a wide nail head and a chip missing from the toe. She put her foot beside it and felt how deep it went. A heavy man on a good horse. Water shining in the impression already. The mud wanting to become a mirror. 3 riders. Dasan said softly. He touched the ground with 2 fingers and brought them to his nose. 2 fine horses and 1 pony with a winter coat not brushed. They wait uphill to look like they are God. Pike, June said. Yes, you know him. I know the men who work for him. Men who can read a rope and like to show it. He hooked his thumb in his belt. There are different ways to speak with men like that. Which do you prefer? The kind where I speak in a place they can't fit a horse. June did not mean to smile, but the corner of her mouth lifted. All right then, we'll speak that way. She sent up a wordless thought, without asking anyone's permission. If there is such a thing as a fair judge who visits a cabin once in a while, let me keep my ledger dry and my fire lit. I ask no more from you than men get when they bring a bottle to your house and a song they didn't write. By half-light before the storm truly broke, June and Dasan reached the lip above the big arroyo, and the rest of the morning was the flood and the shots and the page under her shirt and the cold that taught her a new alphabet. Now, on the far bank, with Pike shifting into the wind along the rim, they ran. They chose the cut that was not obvious. It smelled of wet gypsum and the salt of old tears. The ground underfoot turned from slick clay to gravel, then to bedrock that sang when a hoof struck it. Dasan led with his ear, pausing not for what he saw, but for what he heard. Little shifts in the wind that told him how water spent itself in a curve, the whisper threads of wet sand falling from a ledge. Twice he changed course by a hand's width, and twice June heard, a breath later, a little slide behind where they would have stepped. Who taught you to listen like that? She asked. My brother, he said again, and this time the word came out like a thing rubbed smooth from being touched too much. Where is he now? June asked, before she could stop herself. He is in a place I am not permitted to be, Dasan said. June thought of rules about names and about the way some men kept hair or burned it for grief. She looked at his hair and saw a cut place, near his left ear, where the hair grew awkward, a grief that had not been finished by hand or by fire. She put her eyes on the trail again and saved her voice for breath. They reached Widow's Step in a hush between gusts. The coal seam showed itself as a black grin in a wall of brittle shale, one stare shaped by a story older than cattle and paper. Men had told June more than once that a place named Widow's Step got its name for a reason. Most men had smiled when they said it, as if widows were a kind of joke. June had learned to keep the shape of her own mouth with her teeth. Stop, Dasan said softly. He crouched and traced a finger along the face of the coal. Someone burned here once. A little fire, carefully laid. That ash. It is not from cedar or sage. It is from paper. June's heart thudded. When? She asked, and felt the way her voice jumped at the end, as if she'd tripped on it. Last night, he said, when the wind came from the east. The ash stuck to the face instead of blowing out. He weighed a pebble in his palm. Someone brought pages to this place and burned only some of them. Then threw water. Why throw water? To make certain the fire killed only what he named. June's mouth dried. She felt the page beneath her shirt like a warm animal. The promise in her hook that they would reach this place and learn why a man would never speak his brother's real name. Leaned closer in the rain. A stone clicked behind them. Not the random fall of a trickle finding its bed. A weight. A man's boot, where a man who wanted to be a shadow should have been bare of sound. Run? June whispered. No, Dasan said, almost amused. Speak where they cannot fit a horse. He took 2 steps into a slot where the rock narrowed to a place a person had to turn sideways to pass. Let them come where their rope is a snake tied to a post. Pike's men appeared at the mouth of the path, horses blowing, eyes rimmed gray-white in the weather. Pike did not enter. He sat back and let his riders measure the little space. Mrs. Mallory, Pike called, his voice fair and carrying. You can stand 10 minutes of this game and no more. Then your legs will shake from the cold and you will fall. I admire your stubbornness. I prefer your signature. June waited 1 heartbeat. 2. The wind nosed the coal seam and made a noise like an old woman trying not to weep. She moved the mule behind her and unhooked the wagon rope from her belt. Her hand shook, and she hated that, but the shaking did not keep her from what she had to do. She drew the small hide-bound ledger from the oilcloth packet, held it up so Pike could see the shape of his fear, and then tossed it underhand to the first rider. The rider's hand went up like a man catching a wedding plate. His rope hand lost its hold as his brain told both hands to catch at once. Dasan moved. He became the space where the man's attention wasn't. He caught the loose loop, turned it under his palm in a flat twist June had never seen, and slid. The rope kissed the rider's wrist and tightened in a trick the horse could not see but could feel. The animal reared against the pressure, and the rider's other hand went to the saddle horn and not to his gun, because a falling man thinks of falling first. June pulled the mule backward into the slot. Dasan gave a tiny jerk, and the rider's wrist met stone. He cried out, not like a brave man or a coward, but like a surprised child. The second rider went to his gun too late. The third tried to find a way to bring a horse where there was no horseway. Enough, Pike said softly, and June felt the change. He had decided something. His horse sidestepped, a silk movement for a silk rider, and the rifle rose, not as a threat, but as the end of a sentence. Dasan released the rope and stepped back so the rider could breathe. June smelled the rank fear of the horses and the iron stink of a cut from the rider's wrist. She put the ledger back in the oilcloth and knew she had given up nothing. The page that mattered lay warm against her in a place no man could take without putting his hands where she'd break them. Pike's rifle did not point at her. It pointed at Dasan. You cost me calves last spring, Pike said conversationally, and you cost me more next spring if I let you keep teaching widows tricks. There are some men who don't belong on any side of a fence. I think you know which you are. Dasan did not move. He looked at the rifle as if it were a bird he did not care much about. Mrs. Mallory, Pike said, and for the first time spoke her name like a burden. You can keep the small book. It is mine soon enough. What you cannot keep is the man who tells you you can beat water and paper with a good story. I will count to 3, so we all feel civilized. June put her hand over the page. The world slowed until she could see drops of rain as separate lives. In her mind, she was in her cabin, arguing with the stove, her dead husband not saying anything. She felt the bead token under the ledger in the oilcloth. She felt a choice turning into a place. "Run," she whispered to Dasan. "No," he said softly, then louder, for Pike to hear. "I was named for a kind of knife. I am not that now." "One," Pike said, and his horse shook water from its neck and made his slicker glisten. June's head filled with a good word. Mercy. She wasn't sure to whom she owed it. To the man who had stood between her and a river. To the man who could have taken her house and hadn't yet. To herself, who would hear this day again in her sleep. "Two," Pike said, and the rider with the rope made that small sound again, a man makes when his pride is thinking of opening its skin and crawling out to escape the pain. June pulled the oilcloth parcel to her chest. The wind changed, a tiny sideways thing, and in that turn she smelled smoke that wasn't from any fire a person would own on a day like this. It came from the coal seam, a low, patient exhale, as if a spark had waited in a pocket all night for a name. "Wait," she said, but the word was a scrap in the rain. "Three," Pike said. A shot cracked. Stones spat. Dasan did not fall. A chip of rock jumped from the wall beside his head. He flinched, and then did a thing June would think about when she was old, if she lived to be old. He smiled, not at Pike, not at the rifle, but at the coal seam, as if he had heard it speak. The coal seam spoke. It exhaled a puff that looked too small to matter, and then found air. And in the finding, it made a thread of flame, the width of a pencil. And the thread raced like a child down the seam and around the corner and into a pocket where last night's ash had wanted to die, but did not. The flame said a new word. The word was now. Smoke filled the slot in a breath. Horses went high and wide-eyed. The rider with the rope lost his seat. The second swore. Pike's face did not change. The kind of man who could watch a barn burn and calculate its insurance while he called for water. "Go," Dasan said. His voice was not excited or afraid. It was a tool. He took the mule's lead and pushed past June, then shoved the animal's rump hard so it jumped forward into the tight. June followed, face stung by sparks. Behind, Pike's horse slid on wet shale. That was the whole size of their chance. They ran hard into a world no one would name comfortable. Rock teeth scraped her coat. The page cut her skin through her shirt. June swallowed smoke and learned there were limits to breath, and that she would step over those limits because she'd stepped over other ones last year and lived. They burst from the slot into an open pocket where a wind licked the smoke away. June bent double and cursed softly because the word helped. Dasan looked back the way they'd come. His face settled into that stillness again, the kind you earn by outliving things you do not wish to outlive. "We showed them a trick," he said. "They will pay us back." "How soon?" June asked. "Sooner than I like." He touched the rock with his fingertips. "Before dark." June swallowed. "Then we'll give them something harder to pay." "Like what?" "Like a truth a court can't refuse," she said, and tapped the page under her shirt. "But I need ink. I need a name under mine. A man they fear. Someone not yours or mine to own." She pressed the oilcloth back to her ribs. "They burned a ledger here last night. They did not burn the one line that shames them. They don't know where I stitched it. If I get it to Reverend Ames, he'll keep it till court." Dasan's face made a shape at the name she'd said. "The preacher at the mission?" "Yes. He won't say the names of people who ask his help," Dasan said thoughtfully. "He learned not to, but he will say them in his head. Sometimes that is enough to kill a man." "Would you rather die because a man imagines your name, or because Pike says it aloud at the gallows?" June asked. He looked at her as if she had surprised him again. "Neither," he said. "I would rather pay my own debt with my own hands, and not owe a man who writes prayers." "You swore something already," June said. "Back there in the water. To me. To yourself. Which is it?" He glanced at the mule and said, almost to himself, "I won't let you die in my country." June met his eye. She didn't say thank you, because words like that get lost in the wind. "Then help me make mine a place a man like Pike doesn't own," she said. "If we carry this page to Ames by sundown, he'll ride to Lincoln with a letter. Even a judge who eats company beef will taste the wrong of a burned registration." Dasan's mouth twisted. "You think paper will save you?" "No," she said. "I think it will kill him, and that will save some of us for a little while." They moved. The day shrank as the weather grew. They walked a cut that wound like a snake and smelled like iron and rain. Once, a raven rose black from a carcass and scolded them for coming without paying. June tossed it the rind of her last bacon and told the bird the rest was for the judge. The bird cocked its head like a clerk. June felt watched by more than eyes. Half a mile on, under a caprock that dripped clear and slow, Dasan stopped so abruptly the mule bumped him. He crouched. He drew his finger along a curve in the wet sand. "What?" June asked, and then saw it in the shape his finger traced. A horseshoe mark with a narrow toe. The outer edge burned deeper where a farrier had filed too hard. Inside the curve, barely there, a pebble nick, like a tiny moon. "Pike's horse," she said. "Fresh," Dasan added. "He turned here to set the noose. He will come at us from above in the next draw where the brush is thick enough to look like mercy, and hides men who know how to hold still." June's skin crawled. She had walked with her eyes in the wrong places. Dasan pointed at the brush, the low, silver-green tangle of greasewood and saltbush, the marks where a tail had brushed rain from leaves. She nodded. "How many?" "3, he said. "Maybe 4 if the man who burns paper wants to see the catching for himself. Pike likes to eat from the plate he stole." June felt the page's edges again. They seemed to cut deeper when she was afraid. Dasan rose. "There is a shelf up there," he said, chin lifting. 20 paces. The wind makes a noise in a crack, and a man thinks it is a snake and looks down. If we are on that shelf when he looks down, we are alive. If not, then we are not," June finished. They climbed. The shelf was not made for human feet. It sloped out and down, and the rock flaked like old pastry under a thumb. June's boot slipped once, and her heart fell into her stomach with it. Dasan caught her forearm, with a grip that made the bones in her wrist speak. "Don't look at the drop," he said gently. "It will eat the part of your mind that keeps your feet." "Then talk," she said. "Say anything." He obliged. "My brother liked to argue with the dawn," he said. "He said the day should ask permission before it began." "He sounds like a man who liked his bed," June said. "He liked to lie there and say big words." Dasan's mouth gave that shadow not smile again. "He was brave until it counted, and then he was braver." "What's his name?" June asked softly, forgetting she might be stepping into a taboo by asking. Dasan breathed, and then answered in his own language, a word that slid like water and meant more than one thing. "Brother, blood, blame, the one I failed." He did not say it twice. They reached the shelf. The wind there sang in a way that made June's teeth hurt. You could go numb listening to it. You could forget to count. Dasan lay flat and put his ear to the rock. He counted with his fingers in the dust. 1. A pause. 2. A longer pause. 3. The weights told him what the sound could not. Distance calm, a horse shifting weight because a man's knee had just told it to. He nodded. Then he touched the ground, 2 inches to his left, and lifted something black as crow-wing. A bead snagged in a root hair-thin. June leaned close. 2 tiny beads, one blue, one white, strung beside one another in the same storm pattern as the token under her ledger. The hairs on her neck rose. "Someone who sat up there last night wore this," Dasan said. "Someone who burned paper and didn't know the coal would keep his name in its mouth." "Whose pattern is that?" June whispered. It isn't a pattern most men who ride with Pike choose, Dasan said slowly. It belongs to a family I knew when I was a child. A woman who never dropped things. A man who taught me to listen to snow. They had a son who learned to stand like a tree in a wind and not be seen. He looked at the bead again, as if a stone could lie. He does not wear his family's color without their say. You think the bead means, don't think yet, he said. Look. They looked. Below, the draw narrowed and the brush thickened, and a man's breath made a little cloud at the base of one salt bush. Another man's horse took a step and stopped and did not move again, which was unnatural and meant a hand on a rein like a vice. A third figure sat his horse farther back, a shadow with a slicker that shone when the wind took the water from it. Pike. Options? June asked. None I like, Dasan said. Take one you hate less, she said, surprising herself with the sound of command in it. He nodded as if he'd been waiting for her to earn her half of the day. Give me your rope, he said. He laid hers beside his on the rock, touched the braids, and began to work with quick fingers. He didn't look as he tied. He listened. The knots he made lay flat and wicked, the kind you only saw after they had done their work. June had a sudden sideways thought of a time a year ago when she had imagined herself a person who couldn't learn new knots, because her life had already tied too many. She had been wrong. You watch Pike's shadow, he said. If he moves, tell me before he knows he moved. What if I can't see that? You can, he said simply. She decided to believe him. He finished and pressed the rope into her hands. If I die, he said in that same flat, not dramatic voice, keep going straight east. There is a cottonwood that looks like a man trying not to cry. Behind it, a path. It will take you to the mission. If you cut left before the cottonwood because fear tells you to, you will walk in a circle until someone who is not kind finds you. You say that, like you've done it. I have, he said. He slid along the shelf like a spill of shadow himself. He held to the rock with his fingers and toes until he was gone. June lay flat and counted Pike's breaths. She listened for the coal seam behind her talking again, but it had told its one word already and would not buy them another. The brush below stirred. A quail burst out, stupid with good timing. A rider swore softly. Pike's hat lifted a fraction, as if a thought had tugged on it from underneath. June wet her lips and did not let her mind tell her she was shaking. She put her hand to the page again. It was too warm now, as if she could give it fever. She wondered if her husband would have liked this place, or if he would have called it hell, because nothing grew here that paid. A sound like a cough came from the right, and for a heartbeat, June thought a man had cleared his throat. Then she realized it was the rope sliding across stone. Dasan dropped. Not far, just far enough. He fell like a quiet word inside a loud conversation and landed behind the nearest brush, the way water makes itself at home in any crack. His hand flashed. The first rider's boot jerked. The man barked, a startled dog sound, as the knot tightened around his spur. The horse sprang forward, and in that flinch the second rider's gun came up and stopped halfway, because no one trains a hand to shoot at his friend's face. Pike's hat tilted again, and June saw something under the slick shape of him, a bare sliver of hurry. He lifted his rifle. Now, June whispered to no one and everyone. The wind took the whisper and tore it into lace. Dasan's second knot did its work. The rope caught the second man's bridle and stripped his reins to the stone. The horse tossed its head and stepped backward. Hoof on shale, iron on stone. The sound was a bell. In war, bells mean different things, but the one this made meant, you have to choose now. Pike chose to shoot. The shot shrieked off the rock beside June's ear. She flinched and bit her tongue so hard she tasted copper. She didn't know if she cried out or if the wind used her mouth to make a noise. Dasan moved, fast now. No calm, no teacher's patience, just a man who had told himself once he would be a knife again, if he had to. He went for Pike, because some debts aren't worth living through if you don't try to pay them. Pike brought the rifle down slow, like he was pinning a butterfly to a linen square in a cabinet with labeled drawers. He smiled just a little. He had done the math of how many seconds it would take, and he liked how the sum looked. June picked up a rock. It was a stupid rock, too small to break a skull and too big to throw without opening her palm. She threw it anyway. It hit Pike's horse in the flank. The horse did not rear. He was better than that. But he danced the way a gentleman steps out of a puddle. Pike's shot went wide by a marriage of inches. The bullet hit the coal seam. For an instant, nothing happened. Then a hiss. A sigh. The seam breathed again, this time not with the sly threat of last time, but with a low moan, and a thin sheet of fire ran along the face like a tongue tasting the weather. Sparks fell in a soft rain that did not feel soft at all. Bad luck, Pike said, a little wonder in it, and for the first time he sounded like a man who admitted luck to his vocabulary. Dasan was on him then. Not close enough to kill him, but close enough to put a hand on the rifle and make it not a rifle, but a stick. The two men wrestled with the precision of people who had been trained by different masters. Pike liked straight lines. Dasan liked circles that ended where they started, with someone not breathing nearly enough. June slid, bled her palms, found her feet, lost them, found them again. She ran the length of the shelf to the break, where the rock dropped into a little spill of shale, then down that terrible waste of slope, because if she didn't, the next shot would go where the last one wanted, and the story would end with a page under a rock, and a woman no one would feed, because feeding her would cost them. The mule brayed. The sound was ugly and true. From the brush to June's left, another figure stood and drew a bead on Dasan. Not Pike. A younger man, slicker not so fine, face that looked like it hadn't decided yet what kind of old it would be. His eyes were bright with the mean kind of needing. June didn't think. She did the thing a teacher had once slapped her hand for as a girl. She shouted a name she did not own. "Beshen," she cried. The young man flinched, as if his mother had spoken from behind him. It was a Chiricahua name. She had heard it once in a different winter, when men on tired ponies had skirted her husband's fence, with more dignity than her neighbors at Easter. The name was wrong in this mouth, wrong in this place, but sometimes wrong words do right things. The young man's barrel dipped. His finger flinched off the trigger. He blinked, as if remembering a house he hadn't lived in for a decade. "Who told you?" "That name?" Dasan shouted, so angry the wind stepped back from it. "I guessed," June said, breath ragged. "Tell me later I was stupid. Move now." Dasan moved. He put his shoulder into Pike's chest. They hit the rock and slid. The rifle flew and bit the dust with a sound like a thrown nail. Pike grabbed for it with his good hand and caught a handful of shale instead. Blood came up in his palm like a joke the land made. "Take her!" Pike bellowed, and the word held all his arithmetic. Ledger lines, brand irons, names burned, and names not. The young man with the gun looked at June, looked at Dasan, looked at Pike, and in his eyes a choice walked down a long hallway. Slowly. June reached the bottom of the slope and felt the world tilt under her feet. Quicksand and flood, and now fire at her back. The draw beyond the brush fell away into a pocket she hadn't seen on the way up. The drop looked like a mouth waiting to tell a story. She stepped onto a crumb of ledge and felt it go under her boot, like a lie under a preacher's tongue. She grabbed for a root. The root tore free, with a sound like cloth. Dust jumped. The page under her shirt shifted, and for the first time she wondered if she would drag the secret down with her, and if the land would swallow both and make its own justice out of a meal like that. Her stomach lifted. Her hand found nothing. She fell. She didn't hit the bottom. The rope caught, hard enough to make stars jump in her eyes. A loop bit her ribs, and the page under her shirt bit back. For an instant she hung, the rock face scraping her boots, the drop a mouth breathing up at her. Above, Dasan's forearm corded, muscle and scar lit by the coal seam's thin fire, rain sheeting off him, as if the sky meant to wash him away. "Hold," he said, not loud, and the words stiffened every part of her that thought about letting go. June found the rock with the toes of her ruined boot, pushed, swung. Her shoulder hammered the wall. The rope burned a line through her coat and skin. Then her fingers caught a ledge not big enough to name, and her breath came back in a loud rasp. Dasan hauled. She felt the pull in his body through the rope, a steady human rhythm that said someone on this earth had chosen her life on purpose. Above, Pike swore, a soft, disappointed word, and the young man with the gun stood very still, as if hiding might take root if you held your breath long enough. June's palm slipped. She fixed it and bit the sound in her throat. The page crinkled warm against her. She imagined it tearing free and fluttering like a dark leaf down into water and fire and the open hand of the land that eats. "Up," Dasan said, and there was a kind of smile in the hurt of his voice. "You're heavier with a story. You're not light with yours," she croaked, and he laughed once, and the laugh made her like him more than she meant. They crawled onto the shelf together, bruised and shaking. Below, Pike had his horse, in hand again. He looked up and measured the distance, and then measured the time, and when he had those two numbers, he settled. He raised a hand, a little courtly through the smoke and wet, and said, "Soon," like a promise or a prayer. Dasan's fingers found the rope knot and worried it loose, that flat slide he used, a knot spoken in a language June didn't write. He tucked the rope away as if putting a child to bed. "We take the high cut," he said. "No more shelves that break. No more places fire can speak without us first." They climbed. The rain turned thin and sharp, and then, for a minute, went away. In that small mercy, June smelled the world under the weather. Wet mineral, crushed sage, a faint sweetness from the coal seam's breath. The mule blew and shook itself, and June told it without words that she was sorry for all the ways this day would not be kind to it. "Your shoulder," Dasan said. "It'll complain later." He nodded like a man who knew things that complain later usually do. "2 ridges," he said, counting with his chin. "Then a wash that goes east, like it's in a hurry to leave home. We take that. And then we pay a debt to a woman who taught me not to point with my finger," he said. A small private smile not for June, but for the memory he'd taken down like a tin cup from a nail. They moved between rocks that looked stacked by a big hand, under a ledge where the stone was slick as bone, through a tangle of winter-blackened rabbit brush. The trail was the absence of a better place to put your foot. Twice June caught herself pointing to ask, "Is that a mark?" and stopped because things you do with your hands can insult without meaning to. She kept her fingers flat when she showed him the small signs she saw. A clump of hair on a thorn, a hoof chip with a sliver of iron bright in it, the place where a quail had made a one-step pause that meant something had looked at it wrong. Dasan saw more. He pointed with his lower lip once at a faint crease in the mud. "Man," he said, "not horse." Walked heavy on his right. His left was tired. He carried rope, but not much. See how the grit wrote it against his pant leg. "You saw rope in a smudge?" "I smelled rope in a smudge," he said. Then, because he was not unkind, "Hemp and rain tell on each other." By noon the wind had teeth again. They dropped into the east-running wash and felt the land turn under them, from the coal seam's black grin to a long gray hallway, where the air moved quick and cold. Mesquite leaned like old men in conversation. Greasewood shook its water in a silver curtain, and was gray again. A red-tailed hawk sailed low and insolent, and June made her face still, because where she'd been raised you didn't call what you saw around you a sign. Out here, the land had its own way of telling you what it meant, and it didn't care what you named it. They stopped when the mule insisted. Its shoulder twitched, then its back leg. June set the oilcloth packet on a flat stone under an overhang, slid the page out of her shirt, and laid it under the oilcloth so it would not be a flag. The flesh beneath her collarbone throbbed where the paper had cut her. She rinsed the cut with water that tasted like pennies and sky. When she looked up, Dasan was watching her with that sideways attention of his. "You carry it like a child," he said. "It'll feed one," she said, "if it lives." He crouched. From a pouch flat as a folded letter, he drew a small plug of resin, gold brown and sticky. "Mesquite pitch," he said. "Keeps the wet from climbing into a wound." He warmed it in his palm and pressed it over the cut where the page had kissed too hard. June hissed. "It bites," he agreed. "I thought you cost later," she said. "This feels like payment." "I cost later," he said. "This is just not letting you die of a story's sharp corner." They made a small fire in a cup of rock with the driest twigs a rain day allows. Dasan set a tin of water near it and didn't bring it to a boil, because smoke from boiling carries a long way, and because old habits lived in him, like bones. He crushed a pinch of something green between his hands and dropped it in. The smell lifted, clean and a little bitter. "What is it?" June asked. "Yarrow," he said. "Good for blood that likes to run out of a person too much. Good for the kind of day where you put your body places it shouldn't be." She took the tin, sipped, grimaced. "Tastes like a lie told by a doctor," she said, and his mouth twitched again. They ate what they had, 2 hard biscuits that hated teeth, and a strip of jerky that tasted of smoke and old work. June counted the biscuits left and did the arithmetic of miles. The numbers didn't love her, but they didn't try to kill her outright either. "Where are we going to pay that debt you mentioned?" she asked. He nodded up canyon. "To Losa," he said. "She will not smile at you, but she will tell the truth. She taught me that a person who points with a finger is making a spear of himself. She taught me to point with my lips and with my eyes." "Is she your family?" "She is," he said, the words soft and flat, and wearing 2 meanings in the same coat. "And she is a woman who keeps a good fire in bad wind. What will she want for her truth?" "Nothing," he said. Then honest. "Or everything. Depends on the day you ask her. Depends on what she thinks you'll carry after you leave." He doused the coal of the fire with a careful finger of water. Not enough to make a hiss the wind could carry, just enough to cool it until it looked like the ground around it. June slid the page back under her shirt and made her face into the thing she needed it to be, a part of the land you didn't notice twice. They climbed into scrub that fought your calves and your pride. The wash narrowed and braided. Once June saw a line of glass in the dust, the fine glitter of old lightning in sand, prairie glass, and she stopped, because pretty things can be a trap. Dasan didn't touch it either. He stepped wide and put his palm to the wind and listened. They came on Losa's place sideways. That was the shape of how you visited her. Not straight, not loud. A little cove opened in the wash wall. No door, no fence, only a low brush shelter and a fire that had learned to eat smoke without drawing eyes. A line of yucca leaves hung to dry like green knives. A cradleboard leaned against the pole nearest the rock, beaded bands as narrow and clean as a whisper. No baby. The lines shined. Someone had made them with a mind about neatness. Losa herself sat on a flat rock with a bone needle in her fingers, mending a strap. Her hair lay back in 2 braids wrapped in dark cloth. She did not lift her face when they stepped into her cove. She did not pretend to be surprised. Surprise is a performance. Losa didn't buy tickets to that show. Dasan stopped at the edge of the ash circle and waited. June stopped 2 steps behind him because she knew what it felt like when menace wore a face, and she did not feel menace here, but she felt meat hung on a line and sharp teeth in the brush beyond. Patience makes its own teeth sometimes. Losa spoke in a tongue June didn't have, and then again in the English she'd learned from traders and men who thought slow words made them kinder. "You come with rain," she said to Dasan, "and women who carry a fight under their skin." "Losa," Dasan said, and did not use any name for the dead that a person might be tempting. She said to Dasan, "and women who carry a fight under their skin." "Losa," Dasan said, and did not use any name for the dead that a person might be tempted to use for the living. He touched his chest lightly. "I am here to ask you to see us." "I see," she said. She set the bone needle down and looked June in the face, a full breath, and another. Her gaze was the kind that counted the stitching in a person's coat and kept the count for later. "Your mouth wants to get ahead of your bones," she told June without cruelty. "Don't let it." "I'll try," June said. "You'll fail twice and learn the third time," Losa answered and turned to Dasan. "Come," she said. "Eat a thing that tastes like dust and keeps a person moving." They sat. Losa put a pot near a fire the ash had fooled, and June watched the way she fed the small flame. A pinch, a breath, a done thing. No show, no extra smoke to make a neighbor curious. When Losa served, she offered June the bowl with both hands, the way a person offers a weight, and June took it with both hands and kept her fingers polite and away from pointing. She ate with a willow spoon that had seen the inside of more long days than she had. "You bring the men who burn paper behind you," Losa said between bites. It wasn't a question. "Yes," June said, and left it there because men can smell begging in words. "Do you have the thing they want?" Losa asked, and that wasn't a question either, but a way of saying she had already read the shape of June's chest under her wet shirt. June nodded. "Is it worth what it costs?" Losa asked, and that finally was a question. June looked at Dasan, then at Losa, then at the small cradle board and the banding of blue and white on its face. She touched the oilcloth through her coat with a finger that did not point. "It's worth what it costs," she said, and did not dress the answer up. "Then I will tell you 2 things," Losa said. "One is free. One costs something you will not get back." "I'll hear both," June said. "The free one. The rain will stop before dusk, and the men who want you will move then. They don't know how to hunt in quiet weather. They like noise to stand beside them." June nodded, a small flame of relief lighting and going out in the same second. "The other thing," Losa said, "costs a part of your sleep." She lifted a pouch that lay near her knee, untied it, and shook out a string of beads that were not pretty in any way a town woman would pay for, but carried the kind of pretty a person wants at the end of a trail. 2 tight lines, blue and white, in a storm pattern June knew now too well. "You carry one of these, widow?" Losa said. "Under your book, like you were asked to." June's stomach went hot. She made her face not move. "Asked by who?" "By a woman who doesn't say the names of the dead out loud, because they already have names where they are. She gave that token to your husband to give to you if he didn't come home. He didn't. You found it where a person finds the tenderest hurt. You kept it because you listen to your back when it talks." Losa's eyes didn't blink. "That woman stood here last night. She burned paper you can read and left a thing she didn't mean to." Losa held up a single bead, caught in a bit of old yucca thread. The blue so true it made June think of summer without admitting it. And she wasn't alone. Dasan's body went more still than still. "Who was with her?" he asked. But the question he asked wasn't the question he meant. Losa looked at him. She could have said a name, and chosen a death with her mouth. She didn't. A boy who used to make his mother laugh when he stole food from his own plate and pretended it came from a rabbit, Losa said instead. A boy who will make her cry if she finds out which man he grew into. She set the bead down and drew a breath that lived heavy in her chest. Your kin, Knife Man, your brother who went to a soldier with his hat in his hands and asked which side of a fence he should stand on to keep from starving. Dasan's eyes closed, and the air in the little cove became something June could hold with her fingers. When he spoke, his voice came from a long way. He burned the pages that cleared a chief's nephew last winter, he said. He burned the brand list for the South Draw 2 months ago. He did it for meat for a woman who would not eat without crying, if she knew. Losa stared into the nothing beyond the fire. He did it for pride, she said, and for not pride. He did it because a man who buys debts knows how to talk to the quiet place in a hungry person. He told your brother that his mother would have a window with oil paper in it this winter if the right lines went missing from a book. June felt the page under her breathe, though she knew paper didn't. Beshan, she said softly, and Dasan's hands opened and closed because she had said a name she did not own. Don't, he said, and didn't make it a knife. I won't say it again, she said. Losa looked at the cradleboard. She touched the bead banding. If you take this to the preacher, she said, and he makes a letter that makes a judge think, you will shame the man in the slick coat. You will shame the boy with him more. Shame is a wind that turns a person in a way even right hearts don't like. I'm not looking to shame a boy, June said, surprising herself with the mercy in it. I'm looking to break a man who thinks a widow counts as a number. You think you can separate the two, Losa said dryly. One number makes another, like a child makes the next winter. Dasan breathed slow. What do you ask from me? He said to Losa. Because debts don't stay quiet around people who think straight. Losa tied the bead back in the pouch with a knot June had never seen and set it in Dasan's hand. You bring that boy to stand not at my fire, but where I can see his eyes where the light is honest, she said. You bring him without a rope. If you bring him with rope, I'll cut his name off him, and you'll both be ghosts to this place. I will try, Dasan said. He did not say I swear, because swearing is a kind of pride. Losa nodded and turned to June again. The preacher owes me a favor, she said. He learned to use his eyes and not his mouth for 2 winters, even when other men's faith made him a fool. If you make his fire before the 2nd star tonight, he will walk with you to the line that makes Pike shake his treaty with himself. June stood. She felt the cost of standing. It ran from her rib to her collarbone, where the page had cut, and down her leg, to the place the flood had taught her not to twist. We'll make it, she said, and the words felt like a spear she had asked to hold for a moment, and then found she could keep. Don't point, Losa said mildly, because June's finger had lifted half an inch toward the east, and her habit had been caught like a child with a cookie. June dropped her hand, palm flat, and bowed her head once in apology. Losa's mouth tipped. You'll learn, she said, or you'll die. Both teach. They left Losa's cove with more quiet on their shoulders than they'd brought. The rain went to a mist, then to nothing. The land came into focus like a face in a mirror. A person didn't own. Dasan led without asking if June could keep up. That was how you paid someone the compliment of not making them smaller than their day. Your brother, June said, when they had climbed one ridge and were walking inside a wind that had learned to breathe regular again. He's the reason you won't say his name. Yes, Dasan said. Because if you say it, you'll make it solid, she guessed, harder to break away from. Because if I say it, he answered, a part of me will stand up and walk to him even if my feet don't, and I am supposed to walk a different way. June nodded. She didn't look at him, because sometimes looking is a kind of grabbing. If he comes to the place, Losa asked, "Will you spare him?" "I will make him look at what he did," Dasan said. "If he can stand that, I will spare him. If he cannot, the land will do what it does." "The land doesn't love us," June said. "It doesn't hate us either," he said. "It doesn't know our names." In the quiet that followed, a vulture drifted overhead, its wingtips like torn parchment. It rocked on air that wasn't there, and June swore she could hear the slow leather sound of its feathers thinking about them. The bird didn't circle. It made a lazy line toward the west, and that told June something she didn't want to know, about where the carcasses would pile after the flood. They cut east on a sheep track that wasn't sheep anymore, and found the missionary road by accident, disguised as skill. Wagon ruts ran thin and deep, old iron bites written in the dirt. A scrap of cloth hung on a cholla, like a poor flag. June didn't touch it. The desert keeps what it takes. A mile on, where the road lifted to a low pass, Dasan stopped and crouched. He put his palm on the ground again and turned his head the way a person does when they're trying to hear a voice inside a wall. "They are ahead," he said, "not behind." June's chest tightened. "Pike?" "Not his horse," Dasan said. "A smaller animal, more impatient. The man who rides it chews on his bit when he isn't chewing food. You can hear that? I can hear what it does to the mouth of the horse." He squinted into the pass. "Two of them. One good rider, one who thinks he is." He looked at June. "We make a noise they don't expect." "What noise?" "Truth," he said, spoken where a lie was supposed to land. The riders came into view, not as enemies or friends, but as facts. Dust laced around their legs, hats pulled down, guns low. They reined when they saw June and Dasan. The first man, older, carried himself like a person who had been obeyed by too many things that didn't know better. The second man was young and bright-eyed, and scared of that brightness. "Roads closed," the older said, and there was more in it than the words. There was the stamp of a man paid to speak on behalf of a lie. "By who?" June asked, her voice level. "By the company," the man said. "Flood hazard. Mission's full. Turn back toward town and write your names on a list if you need help." "The company doesn't own this road," June said. "Paper says different," the man replied. Dasan stepped a half-pace forward, not enough to make the horses shy, enough to make who he was a thing in the air. "The paper you carry," he said, "has a brand burned onto it at the bottom like cattle. A U laid over and split at the tail. You show it to me." The older man tightened his grip on his reins. His mouth picked a shape to make, and then decided not to make it. "Turn around," he said, and dropped his hand toward the butt of his pistol, like the gesture itself might get the job done. "The preacher's expecting us," June said. "Losa sent word with the last wind. You close this pass, and you'll make a woman pull a favor back out of a man's pocket. He doesn't like how that feels." The older rider blinked once, slow. He looked at Dasan, then at June, then at the sky like the sky might have a different answer to lend him. "You're the widow," he said finally, and the word didn't have any grease on it. June didn't answer. Words are coin. Don't spend unless you're buying. "You go through," the older rider said, and nudged his horse aside. The young man started to protest and bit it back, when the older lifted two fingers without looking at him. As they passed, the young man looked at June with a face that would someday decide between hard and kind. His gaze flicked to Dasan, and away, then back again. He saw more than he meant to. "Tell your boss," June said to the older rider, "that the paper will be in church by sundown." The older man swallowed. The knot in his throat jumped. "He already knows," he said. They rode. The pass opened like a throat. The land beyond lay lower and gentler in that false way that kills you. Sage flats that roll like a woman's hum when she doesn't want to wake the baby. Distant cottonwoods black as writing along a waterline. The mission wall, a pale square set polite in the wash. A bell hung over the door and did not ring. June's heartbeat settled into something that could be called a plan. She would put the page on Ames's table. He would write careful words around it and make copies like a man spitting seeds into different wind directions. One would find a judge whose pride was tied to looking like law in front of other men. Pike would read it, and for the first time this season, let a thought make his eyes feel tight. "Don't like it," Dasan said softly. "What?" "The quiet. It has a shape like a hole." The mission fence was not high. The gate stood open. The yard held 2 goats with bellies too thin and 3 wagons with wheels too thick, borrowed from the fort and never returned. A woman in a faded dress walked with a bucket and didn't lift her head. A dog lay under a bench and thumped its tail twice like it owed someone money. None of them looked at June and Dasan as if strangers arriving on a day full of bad weather meant anything. Reverend Ames stepped out as if he'd been there all along. He wore a coat that couldn't decide to be black or brown, and a face that had practiced not believing bad news until it was carved that way. He lifted a hand in greeting and lowered it unreadable. "Mrs. Mallory," he said. "Mr. Dasan." He said the name careful, like a man saying a word in a different language with respect. "Reverend," June said. "You bring trouble," he said. "We bring paper," June said. He stood aside. "Then we owe you a table." He looked at Dasan. "We owe you a place to stand where the light isn't a liar." Dasan nodded once. The mission smelled like meals that didn't fill anyone, and books that did. June stepped in and felt the way a room changes a person's size. Her shoulders came down. The page felt safer and more dangerous by half. She put the oilcloth on the table and slid the wet knot free. The paper came out clean and heavy, wax-shedding water like a back that has learned to do that. Ames's eyes flicked once to the cut on June's collarbone, then down to the page. He didn't ask. "Good. What am I looking at?" he asked, because he had learned not to pretend he knew. "The winter branding list for the South Draw," June said. "Written by my husband's hand and countersigned by Ezra Pike, who did not read each line he signed because he had a dance to go to that night." She met Ames's eyes. "It shows the brand on Clayton Pike's herd can be made with a second bar on a lazy ewe. It shows where that second bar was added after calving, not before. It shows the county paid him for animals that came from other men's grass. It shows names beside brand marks that aren't the names of the men who raised the calves. It shows a line where a name used to be and isn't anymore." Ames looked where she pointed, not with her finger, but with the flat of her hand. He bent close. His breath touched the paper as if even air could smear a truth. "You sure?" he asked, and the question held no insult, only the weight of what happens after sure. "I put the line there," June said. "Then I sewed it into that wagon because I was told by a woman I didn't know to do it. Today at Widow's Step, we saw where someone burned the older pages and thought they had burned this one. They didn't." She put her hand over the place where the name had lived and been stolen. "That line was a man's son. That's what Pike wants gone more than the proof of theft." Ames lifted his gaze to Dasan. "Your brother," he said, only a little question in it. Dasan's breath left him in a quiet, tired thing. "Yes," he said. "If that bead in Losa's hand wasn't a lie. And you came here anyway," Ames said, and a thin edge of respect found its way into his voice. "Pike owns the paper men bring to my door," June said. "He can't own all of the paper if we make enough of it." Ames sat. He reached for his pen, as if reaching for a weapon he had been ashamed to call weapon, till now. He folded a sheet with that neatness of men who think straight on good days. He dipped the pen and let the excess fall back into the bottle, without shaking. "I will write 2 letters," he said. "One to Judge Black in Lincoln, who likes to look at his face in his window when he thinks about the law, and one to Captain Hay at the fort, who likes to disbelieve me until he can imagine how credit will land, if he believes me first." "Write a 3rd, June said, the nerve in her voice a live wire. "To the newspaper in Mesilla, the one that hates to say it backs any man, and loves to count when men fall. They'll want to print a scandal on Monday." Ames's mouth quirked, the closest it came to a grin. "You been reading my mail?" he asked. "Your mail talks loud," she said. He wrote. The scratch of the pen was a small, honest sound. Dasan stood near the door, not blocking it, listening to the yard like a man who understands birds that don't sing. June watched Ames's hand and saw it shake once when he came to the line where a name had used to be. He didn't write the absent name. He wrote what was there, the blank, and circled it as if the circle itself were a word. "We'll need a witness to your handwriting," he said to June without looking up. "Ezra Pike," she said. Ames huffed a laugh through his nose. "Second choice." "Eli Harper," she said at once, and the name was out of her mouth before her fear could fetch it back. "He signed beside my husband when they delivered calves to the company last spring. He's mad enough at Pike to stand in a doorway. He won't be easy to move, but he won't move over this just to be easy." "Then I'll send for him," Ames said, "and I'll do it quiet." He finished the first letter and sanded it, dust glittering. He started the second, then stopped and tilted his head. Dasan turned his face a fraction toward the door. Quiet made a shape again. "What?" June said. "Shoes," Dasan murmured. "The kind a man wears when he wants to look like law in a place where boots do. 7 pairs. Ames didn't get up. He looked to the little wall that wasn't a window, but a hole with oil paper stretched over it. The light there had a shadow. "Company men," he said. "They have company paper," Dasan said. "They will ask you to let them be the law today." Ames laid his pen down and folded his hands. The motion made him look like a man about to pray. He didn't. He looked at June. "If you hand me that page," he said quietly, "they will search my house and take it, and say they didn't. If you keep it on your body, they will call you a thief of your own life, and take your body, and say they didn't. There is a 3rd way. It isn't good." "Say it," June said. "I put the page in the hymn book we use for funerals," Ames said. "I tell them to search my shelves. I open to Lamentations and ask them to sing with me while they look. Their pride will keep them from turning that page. Pride is a kind of blindfold." "That's the 3rd way?" June asked, too close to laughing. "The 4th is we run," Ames said. "We won't make the yard," Dasan said. "They'll have the pass shut," June said. Ames nodded. "3rd way then," he said, and stood, and for the first time in June's memory, he looked like a man who could be dangerous when the hour said he could. Boots stopped outside. A fist hit the door once, twice, hard enough to prove itself, not hard enough to break anything and look like a sin. Ames opened. "Afternoon, Reverend," a man in a hat that claimed it belonged to an officer said. His coat was fine enough to shrug off other men's want. "We're here on the county's business." "Business in a church," Ames said mildly. "I hope it's a wedding." "Warrants," the man said, smiling like a dog that's learned to do it on command. He held out a paper with a stamp, the color of old blood, for the seizure of stolen property and the arrest of one June Mallory for obstructing county action and consorting with known fugitives. June didn't move. She kept her hands where they were. She held her face in the place between small and loud. "You came in time for the 3 o'clock singing," Ames said. He moved to his shelf and took down the hymn book with hands that didn't shake. "We begin with a lesson," he said. He opened the book to Lamentations, as if he always did, and slid the page beneath the onion skin paper, where words about a ruined city lived. He turned to the men and held the book open, the paper hidden, his eyes calm. "Read," he said pleasantly. "Show me you remember what a loss looks like on a page." The men shuffled, insulted by a thing they couldn't name. The leader held his jaw in a way that said he had memorized other men's readings and did not like to be asked to make his own. He didn't look down. "We'll search first," he said. "You'll search a church?" Ames asked in that same calm. "Be sure to tell your wives tonight how brave you were." A few of the men flushed. Shame rolled through the room like a pig that had found a bag of flour. June saw two feelings meet in the leader's face: the wanting to search and the wanting not to look like a man who needed to. Pride beat hunger for one heartbeat. Then the door behind the men darkened, and a shape filled it. A slicker beading water, like last hour's rain, had come back for one man alone. Clayton Pike smiled, and the room got smaller in a way that made June understand why men waste bullets sometimes. "Reverend," he said. "Mr. Pike," Ames said. "You have something of mine," Pike said gently. "I have a hymn book," Ames replied, "and a bowl I keep near my door for travelers. Two things I already own," Pike said, "and a widow who's been taught to think she's smarter than a herd." June breathed in and out, and wished she could put her hands in her pockets, to keep them from doing anything her mouth could be blamed for. The dog under the bench thumped its tail once. Pike let the quiet stay long enough to grow teeth. "Search the place," he told his men, and this time his pride used different arithmetic. 4 men fanned. One went to the shelves, one to the small room where Ames's bed made a shape under a thin cover, one to the trunk where the mission's poor things lived, one to the back door. Desan didn't move. He watched the man at the back door as if patience were a horse he could bridle. The man at the shelves put his hand on the hymn book, not the one in Ames's grip, but the twin that sat 2 places down. He flipped pages with a finger that had filed its nail into a useful shape. He nodded to himself in a way that told June he thought the world keenly organized. He closed the book and reached for the book in Ames's hands. Ames smiled like a man telling a child a secret. "This one's for funerals," he said. "We wash our hands before we touch it. You'll find the basin by the door." The man hesitated. His fellows snorted. "Wash for singing?" one said. "What kind of God is that?" "The kind that hears you," Ames said without heat. Something in the man's face remembered a mother who had slapped his wrist once, in a good kitchen, for touching bread with dirty fingers. He put the book back. He went to the door, poured a splash, scrubbed quick, cast a glance at his fellows as if to say, "Look, I can be proper without losing teeth." Behind him, the leader smiled around his shame. Pike watched. He had the bored look of a man whose trick is working and who knows it, and something else underneath. A flicker, a private calculation that had learned to be fast in rooms with men who talked too much. He stepped to the table and looked down at the oilcloth June had left folded there. He lifted one corner. He looked at the blank. He let it fall. His eyes went to June then, not to gloat, but to see if he could. "You carried it under your shirt," he said softly, so the room didn't hear. "Good thinking." June held his gaze. She did not let her hand lift to the cut. "You should wash too," she said, "because sometimes a person must say a thing the way a person must cough." Pike's smile thinned. He turned to the leader. "Arrest the widow," he said. "On what grounds?" Ames asked, gentle as warm water. Pike held up the other paper, the one with the stamp that loved to be the color of dried blood. "Grounds," he said. "Read it," Ames said. "I have men to read to me," Pike answered. "Then you don't know what it says," Ames replied. It was not unkind. It was a cut. Pike's face didn't change. He took a step. "Mrs. Mallory," he said, "I'll count to 2, At 1, you walk with us. At 2, you learn how a door can be heavy in winter. June felt the page between the hymn paper and her hope. She felt Dasan at the door without looking. She felt Ames's pen still wet on his desk. She felt the dog under the bench gather itself like a story. 1, Pike said. Your brother's here, June said to Dasan without moving her lips. It wasn't a guess. A smell had come with the men. A tobacco not from Pike's pocket. A leather dressing made with bear fat and lye and something she couldn't name. It lived on Dasan's breath when he'd laughed by the coal seam. It lived on the bead Losa had turned in her palm. It lived now on the air, in a thin thread, like a song a person hums when they don't know they're singing. Dasan's jaw tightened. I know, he breathed. 2, Pike said, and that was when the bell over the mission door rang itself. No hand touched it. Wind did not move it. It rang with the deep, honest sound iron makes when the old crack you thought was a scratch finds a friend in a new weather. A hairline seam, that was all, deciding to be a line. Every head turned. The leader flinched. The man with the clever finger at the shelves crossed himself without knowing, and then looked embarrassed at his own hand. Pike didn't blink. He drew a breath to say, 3. The bell rang again. Once, hard, as if a thing that had been patient had chosen not to be. In the back door, a young man stepped halfway through and stopped. He had a rope burn on his wrist in the shape of a knot that lay flat and wicked. His eyes were the color of a storm that had decided which town to drown. He saw Dasan, and his mouth opened in a small boy shape. He didn't say a name. He looked like a name had said him. Brother, he whispered. And every gun in the room turned toward the sound, because men who hadn't earned brothers still understood the price of that word. Ames didn't move. June didn't breathe. Dasan's hand lifted half an inch, palm out. Not a plea, not a stop. Something else, a thing that said wait and remember and choose. The young man, Beshan, though June bit her tongue not to think it too loud, took one step inside. The dog under the bench made a sound that was part welcome, part warning. Pike did not look at the young man. He looked at June. He smiled. Now, he said, and his eyes told June he had found his arithmetic again. June reached for the hymn book. Pike's hand went toward his gun. Dasan moved like a blade, remembering what it is. The young man moved too, but not toward or away, sideways, into a place only he could see. The bell began to fall from its beam. It came down like a judgment, iron and old prayer and rust. The beam split with a dry scream, and the bell swung, bit light, and fell into the room across the front pew with a sound that made men forget their fathers' names. Dust rose. The floor jumped. Guns jerked at the wrong angles. June moved. She didn't run at Pike. You don't run at a cut snake. She ran at the hymn book. Her fingers found the onion skin page where grief lives, slid under, and lifted. The waxed sheet caught for a breath. Then came with her like a child, too heavy, but yours. Pike's pistol barked. The shot took the corner off the lectern and made cedar splinters sing against the wall. Dasan hit Pike's arm, and the second shot kissed the iron shoulder of the fallen bell, and went shrugged away, by metal that had heard worse. Men shouted. The leader tried to be a leader, and got swallowed by the noise in his own throat. The clever finger man at the shelves dove, and came up with nothing but a book like a shield. The dog under the bench became a hard, bright line, with teeth, and latched onto a trouser cuff that belonged to the man, who thought boots made him law. Beshan didn't run. He stepped into the room, and into the shadow of the bell, and stood there like a post pounded into flood ground. Rain on his coat, smoke on his hair, rope burn on his wrist. He looked at Dasan, the way a boy looks at a door that's been shut so long it learned to be a wall. Brother, he said again, and that word was a small boat with too many bodies in it. Down. Ames snapped. Not at Beshan, but to the room, and then, impossible, he began to sing. His voice wasn't pretty. It was true. "It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed," he sang, and shame flinched in a few faces that still remembered a kitchen and a slap for touching bread with dirty hands. The men hesitated, and in hesitation lived a road. Pike didn't. He drew breath, reset, learned the new room in a heartbeat. His pistol came up. Dasan took it. He didn't grab. He turned Pike's wrist with that flat, wicked slide his rope knots had taught him. Bone spoke. The pistol fell. The bell's rim caught it. June had the page and the door in the same thought. She turned, and the leader, bless him for being a nuisance and not a killer, leapt to block her, then looked at the hymn book still in Ames's hands, and faltered, because somewhere inside him, a rule told him, you don't wrestle a pastor in his church while the man is singing about mercy. June's shoulder hit him, and mercy spared his ribs, but not his pride. He stumbled. She cleared the door into sun as the bell rolled once and settled, like a big heart, learning a slow beat. "Keep moving," Ames called, voice thin but steady under the hymn. "Keep moving," Dasan echoed, and the echo wasn't words so much as a hand in the back. June cut across the yard, skirting the goats, the wagons, the dog's bright war. The page slapped her chest under her coat, warm again, alive like a lie about to be made true. The east gate yawned. Beyond it, the low road to the cottonwoods lay open, the way a trap lies open. Pike's men poured into the yard, coughing dust, swearing at iron. Two leveled, their guns at June. One hesitated at the sight of her hand, empty of a weapon. The other didn't. His muzzle swung. "Don't," Beshan said behind him, and he said it not to a man, but to a day. His hand shot out. He grabbed the second man's sleeve and jerked. The shot tore a line through air a foot from June's shoulder and killed a corner of the mission wall that had done nothing but stand. Dasan was on them. He moved the way water chooses a line. Quick, quiet, sure. A heel to a wrist, a twist. A gun skittered under a goat that decided today was not the day it took a bullet for a church. The young man staggered and regained his feet with the fast anger of a person not ready to decide what he is. He looked at Beshan like he wanted to be told who to be. Pike stepped through the doorway, hat gone, hair wet, slicker shining, eyes like an open ledger. He took in the yard in a single count and put his finger on the sum. "You," he said to Beshan, gentle as a father. "Come here and we can forget math." Beshan did not move. He looked at Dasan. The rope burn on his wrist had new blood under the old. June backed toward the cottonwoods. The mission road ran like a line a child draws when the teacher says to keep it straight. She didn't trust a straight line. "Reverend," she called, not loud, but the name carried because names do when they were earned the slow way. Ames appeared in the doorway with 3 folded sheets and the kind of face a man wears when he knows his windows won't survive the week. He handed the letters to a boy with eyes too old for his mouth and pointed to the back fence. "Run the goats," he told the boy. "Let them lead you like sinners." The boy ran. The goats bellowed and bolted for the hole in the fence that goats always know. Men are worse at holes. The boy slipped through the thorn and was gone with 2 letters and a prayer that smelled like dust. "Take the third," Ames said to June, and pressed it into her hand. Messiah's paper written neat and indifferent inside. Even if the judge eats beef, the printer eats scandal. June tucked it under the ledger. "I'll make it," she said, and the way she said it made Ames believe 3 seconds more than he had. Pike lifted his hand. Men spread. Rope whispered. June saw the loop come open like a hungry mouth, and she tasted again the quicksand mouth on her ankle. Not today. She cut left, away from the gate, away from the road, into low scrub and a stand of saltbush that looked like a green apology. Men shouted. A loop hissed and fell short. A bullet chewed sand by her heel. She ran anyway, and the page ran with her. Dasan didn't follow her at first. He stepped between Beishan and the men who would decide Beishan for him. It wasn't hero work. It was family work. "Look at me," he said in their tongue, words that meant more than one thing. "Look, here, remember. Don't drown when a man offers you bread with his foot on your neck. You burned. Pages," he said. "You put our mother's bead on a string with a man's lie. You stand still now, or you'll never stop moving again, until your bones do." Beishan's breath hitched. He wasn't a child, but children had followed him here. "I didn't," he began, and then stopped lying to himself. "I did," he said. "I burned too. I took a coin to keep Losa's fire. I thought I could count the loss for the men I didn't see, and for the woman you did," Dasan said, not looking at June, because to look would be to pretend he was noble for not asking her to hear. "Now you choose who you are before men choose for you." Pike had a pistol again. He pointed it at Dasan's chest, like a pen at a line that needs crossing. "This is sweet," he said. "I could sell tickets. Step aside, knife man. Let the county have the widow. Let me have the rope I paid for." "Your rope paid me," the young clever finger shouted without meaning to, because the knot on his wrist still spoke. Pike shot him a look that promised arithmetic later. "June," Dasan called without turning. "Cottonwoods, man trying not to cry." "I see him," June panted, and she did. The cottonwood rose black-green and gullied, its trunk flayed by weather, until it looked like a face pulled too long by grief. Behind it, the faint invitation of a path wound east, like a quiet thought. Men fanned to cut her off. June took a low place that cost her skin, and bought her 5 beats. A loop kissed her hat brim and stole it. The hat rolled. A goat trampled it out of malice or grace. She slid under a deadfall, came up with dry bark in her eyes, and there was the path, where the ground remembered feet that weren't in a hurry. Losa's words came back. "If you cut left before the cottonwood, you'll walk a circle until someone who is not kind finds you." June didn't cut left. Behind, the mission yard teetered on the edge of a new math. Pike stepped for a shot at Dasan's back. Beishan moved first. He didn't grab the gun. He grabbed Pike's wrist with the same flat, wicked slide Dasan had put into him as a boy, with sticks for knives and rope for a teacher. Pike hissed, surprised that men he had counted like fence posts could count back. "Don't," Beishan said to Pike. Not a plea. A line. For a second, the yard held its breath. In that second, the bell's rim shifted, iron sighing as it found flatter ground. June reached the cottonwood and slid behind it, chest heaving, page slick under her shirt, letter to Messia crackling like a dry leaf. She pressed her back to the bark and felt the tree's long, slow thought. Then someone fired. Not Pike, not Dasan. The leader who had been trying all day to be the shape of a man he had told himself he was. His shot went where worry pointed, at the confusion, at the wrist on his boss's arm. Beishan jerked. He wasn't thrown back like a play. He folded a little, like a man ducking under a door he had been through too many times. Dasan turned and caught him, and that was the first time June saw Dasan lose his teacher's calm. His face broke. The shape of it said a name June didn't hear, because he didn't speak it, because he had told himself he wouldn't, because the world would change if he did. Pike stepped away, cradling his wrist, eyes gone flat with a new kind of calculation, the kind that counts how many men will follow you if you let a boy bleed in a churchyard. "Not mine," he said to the leader in a tone that meant everything and nothing. "Yours." The leader's mouth opened to say he hadn't meant, and closed on the understanding that meaning doesn't count after iron speaks. "Go," Dasan told June without looking, but she was already moving, East down the path that remembered kindness. Feet light as a person with too much weight in her arms can make them when she must. The path bent between low rock, then into willow that whispered and hid. The wash beyond ran shallow but fast, tea-colored from the coal seam above. June splashed through, found a hard bar under her boots, crossed, and breathed. The land east opened into low hills and a sky that had stopped hating faces for a while. Behind, the yard's noise thinned. She didn't go far. She waited in a crease where a person becomes brush if she holds still. She wrapped the page again, slid the Messia letter under the oilcloth, bound it with her tack knot, and tucked the parcel deep in the mule's pannier, under the jerky and the tin cup and the bit of blue and white bead on leather she had never claimed as hers. She ran her thumb along the bead's storm pattern once, and put it away like a word she would not say aloud. Boots came on the path, a long minute later, a quiet pattern that wasn't chase. Dassan's shoulder came first, then the line of his jaw, then his eyes, which had learned a new distance in an hour. Blood on his sleeve, not his. Rope in his fist, his. He stopped in the crease and let his breath learn to be regular again. "Bashan?" June asked. "He breathes," Dassan said. "For now." He didn't sit. He knew if he sat, he might not stand the same. Ames stood in front of the men and read their names out loud, with their fathers' names after. It shamed 3, and made 2 angry, and left Pike cold. The boy with the letters got to the wash. The goats chewed doctrine. And Pike? "Counting," Dassan said. "He will count until a clock rings in his head. Then he will come with men who aren't embarrassed to kill in daylight. Then we go," June said. They went. The path took them east into lope ground, the kind that keeps you from thinking too many thoughts at once. A hawk rode a lazy line above, and the sun smudged itself on the horizon, like a thumb on wet ink. June knew the time by the way shadows lived longer than the things that cast them. They made the cottonwood that looks like a man trying not to cry into a memory behind them. They made a low ridge where old fire had licked stones into glass. They made a cut where someone had once rolled a wagon downhill and left a scar, like a rule. Then the land offered them a mercy, disguised as a chore. A dry creek bed with walls high enough to hide a mule and 2 people who had learned how to fold themselves into smaller shapes. They hid there through the hour when men whose pride was hurt most make their worst plans. June checked the parcel, without looking like she checked it. Dassan bound his forearm with a strip torn clean from his shirt. He tied it with that flat sliding knot, and June realized she had learned the motion in her hands. The rope burned knowledge into skin. They spoke low. "He said your name," June murmured. "He said a word," Dassan answered. "The land keeps our names in a place we don't. I won't pull one out where it can be stolen." "He'll live to say it again?" she asked. "If he chooses to," Dassan said. "He has to choose it like a man chooses to stand in front of a horse that's never been asked to stop. And if he doesn't, then I'll speak it once," Dassan said, "under my breath, in the place a man speaks to his mother's bead. Then I'll let the land keep it." June didn't say sorry. She put her hand on his sleeve once. He didn't shake it off. They moved when the sky turned the color of things men bury. The wash led them to a rise where the mission's pale square was a memory, and the east road to Messia, a promise. A freighter's wagon groaned in the distance with a sound that meant money, and a small cloud of dust near its rear wheel meant a boy running. June smiled without showing teeth. She put a hand flat to her chest, where the letter to Messia had left a warmth. They took the lower trail to avoid men with hats that reflected stars. It twisted through scrub and spilled into a flat as wide as a thought you don't say aloud. There, the wind carried a sound June had learned to hear today. Rope, not tight, touching wood. Men waiting with loops easy. A horse shifting slow, So the jingle made a prayer you don't answer. Ambush, she whispered. Yes, Dasan said. Not for us. They edged the long way around a stand of mesquite and looked down on a cut where the road narrowed to fit one wagon's idea of itself. Men sat their horses like punctuation. A comma, a period, an exclamation point. Pike wasn't there, but his coat was. On the back of a man who had earned it doing math for him. In the notch, a team ground to a stop. The boy at its rear looked for a hole goats would love. No hole. June's belly went cold. The letters, she said. Dasan weighed the distance, the count, the ground's appetite. We can make 2 of them fail, he said. Not 3. 2 is enough to open a hole, June said, and the boy knows holes. Dasan looked at her. You throw, he said. You are lighter. I miss, she said, honestly. You missed Pike's head and hit a horse, he said. Good aim for the aim that was needed. He put a coil in her hands. His, not hers. The one with the flatmaker's braid. The weight a thing you hear with skin. He showed her once, twice, the quiet circle. The place the loop lives when it isn't yet hungry. Don't think, he said. It knows where to eat. She breathed. She let her shoulder remember the shelf, the fall, the catch. She sent the loop into air. It bit a wrist. The exclamation points. He yelped, and his rein hand flew wide, and his horse chose for him to be a smaller man than he had hoped. The comma's horse shied at the sudden grammar. The period looked left and lost his sentence. Dasan was in the cut, before thought could get cocky. He hit the period low and took the wind from him, and then breathed it in, like a man who needed some. Run, he told the boy, and the boy ran with both letters like a child who has stolen a pie, and means to forgive himself when he is old. A shot rang from the mesquite where no one had been a breath ago. Dasan ducked, and the bullet combed his hair, like a mother with a coarse brush. June dropped behind a stone and counted how many plays Pike had left before he had to come out of his chair and make his own hands dirty. Go, Dasan said again, this time to June, not because he meant to stay, but because he knew opening a hole costs a person something extra. She went. She kept low. She kept the mule quiet, because the mule read men better than men do, and had decided it would die for June, but preferred not to. They crossed the flat, found the far bank, slid down the back side into a wash that smelled like clay and poems. They didn't stop. Not when the moon put a white knife on the path. Not when coyotes told a joke they found funnier than you did. Not when a distant thunder from the coal seam said the fire hadn't finished talking to itself. They walked into night like people who had been taught by a day to keep both feet and their eyes. Toward midnight, the road to Messia became a line with wagons on it, and men not ashamed to share water. A blacksmith's cart rattled past, with iron singing softly in its sleep. A woman with a baby under her shawl looked at June as if they were sisters, just for a blink. The lights of the town smudged the horizon. A smell of chile and wood smoke and something like a promise came on the air. They went to the printer first. The building had a plank floor that remembered boots and a press that looked like a man who'd kept his shoulders for honest use. The foreman, hair salt white and eyes awake, took the letter like a man weighs a fish, hand under its belly, hopeful, skeptical, hungry. Monday, he started to say, then saw the word Pike in the second line and decided to be a different kind of brave. Tonight, he said instead, we'll run a proof like a thief and lay hands before dawn. June put the oilcloth on his desk and did not open it. You print without this, she said. You print the question. The paper goes in a judge's house before your ink dries. The foreman nodded. Questions sell better, he admitted, and his grin made him look like a boy with ink on his cheek. They left to find the judge's runner at the boarding house where he slept in his boots. They banged a door and got yelled at and paid a coin and a promise. Then, they went to the room Ames kept above the saddler's shop, when he pretended he didn't have a church because he needed to talk to men who wouldn't walk under a cross. They found a bed with sheets clean enough for a conscience and a window with a crack like a river on a map. They didn't light a lamp. June didn't sleep. She lay with the parcel under her palm and counted her breaths until each was an act and not a thing a body owes. When the sky went from black to the gray, that means the day intends to arrive, with or without you. She rose, washed with water that had to pretend it was enough, and opened the parcel on the table with slow fingers. Dasan stood by the window, not looking at the street, looking at the crack. When the judge reads, he said, he will ask for the name on the blank line. Yes, June said. And you will put ink where a bead used to be, he said. I will put truth, she answered. If a man wants to build a gallows from it, that will be his craft, not mine. You will write my brother, he said, not a question. June set the page flat. The empty line looked like a scar someone had polished. She dipped the pen. Her hand did not shake. She looked at Dasan, and he looked at the crack, because men sometimes can't look at their own mercy. I will write the name he chooses, she said, if he stands to choose it. Footsteps came quick on the stairs. A knock, not shy. Ames. He stepped in, smelling of cold and ink and goat. Judge Black sent a deputy with a wagon and a face that wants to be brave after breakfast, he said. The captain at the fort sent a man to scowl at me and admit he doesn't like being made a fool by beef. The printer told me not to come back unless I bring him a lie, because the truth he has will do fine without me. And Pike already knows, June said. Ames nodded. He moved last night. He likes to be at a house before the lamp's trimmed. Then we're late, June said. But she didn't mean for the road. She meant for the line. Dasan closed his eyes once, opened them, and spoke a word in his first language. It wasn't a name. It was a kin word, the sort you use when you don't say names of the dead and you want to say more than brother. Then he said, in English, if he stands for the writing, you write it. If he doesn't, you write what he did and leave his name to the land. June set the nib over the line. Boots thundered on the stairs again. Too many, too fast. Wrong hour. Not Ames. Not the deputy who likes breakfast. Company men who had learned that knocking looks good in print, but the door breaks the same either way. Ames didn't reach for the pen. He reached for the hymn book. Dasan turned, and for a heartbeat, June saw what he would be if he had chosen to be a knife all his life. Then the door blew, and the room filled with hats and paper, and the smell of men who sleep well after they steal. Clayton Pike stepped in last. He had a fresh coat and a little bandage on his wrist, and a smile that wanted to sell itself as kindness. Mrs. Mallory, he said, you've had a busy liturgy. June put the pen down, without putting ink on the page. She slid the sheet back a hand's width, so the men could see the empty line if they were bold enough to look. Pike looked. He smiled more. That line is the one that keeps you poor, he said pleasantly. You fill it, and you'll have to decide what kind of man you want to hang with your story. Some men hang themselves, June said. True, he said, but they always want company. He dipped his head to Dasan, the acknowledgement a man gives a dog he means to shoot later. Your boy did a brave thing by accident yesterday, he said. He has a talent for that. If you love him, you'll keep him from accidents that involve rope. Dasan's breath made a sound June had never heard from him, like a knife that learned to be a plowshare and was being asked to remember steel. A new voice came from the doorway, thin with blood loss, thick with a decision. Don't ask my brother to love me by lying, Beshan said. He stood there with his left arm bound in a strip of white that had been someone's good shirt, face the color of the inside of a winter gourd, eyes so bright it hurt. Losa came with him, her mouth a straight line and her hands empty of anything a man could take. She did not look at Pike. She didn't make a show of not looking. She simply put herself in a corner of the room and let her breath find the same shape as the wall. Pike's smile thinned, then widened, then settled. 3 calculations in one breath. "There you are," he said, as if he had been waiting for a groom. "A sensible day to earn your pay twice." Beshan didn't answer him. He looked at June, and then at the page, and then at the pen. His fingers moved without him looking at them, the way a man's fingers do when they have done the same work since he was small. He touched the bead at June's parcel's edge, and then let it go. "I burned what you asked me to," he said to Pike, and the room watched the word asked. "Try to wear clothes, then drop them. I was hungry for my mother and stubborn for myself. I was proud like a man who thinks a fence will keep weather. I stood at Widow's step and made the fire where you told me, and dropped water on it when I was done, and left a bead I didn't mean to, because I was too much of a boy that hour." Pike's face did not change. He could have sold ice to a flood. "And now you want to be poor for God," he said. "It's a common sickness." Beshan shook his head. "No, I want to be poor for me," he said, "and for the woman who burned the other pages and cried because she loved a man she hated. I want to be poor for the boy who almost shot a dog because his hand didn't know what it was for. I want to be poor because the rich way made me small." He walked to the table. No one stopped him because the room had paused for a new math. He put his right hand on the paper, where the line had been pulled like a scar. "I don't have a name you can use," he said to the air. "The one the soldiers write isn't mine. The one my mother gave me isn't for this room." He looked at Dasan. "Say nothing," he added, "and there was love in it, and a hard, straight thing you build a house from." Dasan said nothing. He didn't breathe for a count of 3, then did. Beshan looked at June. "Write this," he said. "Draw my maker's mark." He turned his forearm and showed a small stamped pattern, burned into the leather of his bracer. 2 rows of blue and white dots, a storm line. The beadwork turned into the small, honest geometry his father had pressed into his kit when he was a boy. "Write it with words," Beshan said. 2 blue, 2 white, storm going east. Put that where a name wants to be. I'll add a sign, in the way these men read." He took the pen in his right hand and made an X. Straight, plain, no shame in it. Then he touched his rope-burnt wrist to the wet ink and left the ghost of a print next to the X, the lines of his skin like a map only one family understood. Silence, the kind that counts. "That's not a name," Pike said softly. "It is a witness," Ames said. "And a witness eats lies, like fire eats paper." Pike's smile broke the smallest amount. He looked at the men he paid to be law, and saw 2 who had learned something they couldn't sell to him later. He looked at Losa, and the look died in his mouth. He looked at the page, the X, the print, the words, 2 blue, 2 white, storm going east, written in Ames's neat hand, on the line where he had paid a boy to disappear. He breathed. "All right," he said. "All right." He straightened his coat and learned again the weight of a pistol in a room where truth had made itself heavier than iron. Then the county will learn that witnesses die in floods. He lifted the gun. He pointed it at Beshan. June didn't shout. She moved. She slid the open oilcloth into the air, as if tossing a plate at a child she meant to scare from a fire. The waxed sheet flashed, caught Pike's eye for a fraction, and in that fraction, men who counted less did more. Losa stepped between Pike and his math with nothing in her hands and everything in her face. She didn't speak. Her eyes were enough. They told a man what he would be in his own story if he shot through a mother. Pike wasn't that kind of brave. His hand twitched. The muzzle dipped. Dasan took the gun again, not with pride, with grief. Bone spoke. The pistol fell to the floorboards like a sin finding a place to sit. The deputy who likes breakfast finally arrived, to be a man with a badge in a room where badges had been props. He saw Pike unarmed and breathing hard, and two men he didn't want to arrest in the company of his preacher, and a woman with paper. He did a thing his grandchildren would thank him for. He took off his hat. "Mr. Pike," he said, "you'll come with me on account of my need to have a calm talk where other men can hear." He paused, then added, almost reverent, "And we'll take that paper to the judge's eyes." Pike laughed once, short, a sound with no belly. "This territory doesn't hang men like me," he said. "No," Ames said gently. "It freezes them out of rooms where doors shut and men remember what they saw." In the end, Clayton Pike didn't hang. He lost a contract and 3 friends who liked the sound of their own singing, and 2 men who had promised to look the other way, and couldn't anymore when the printer put their names beside a storm going east. He took a winter in a city with walls that made water mind itself. He learned to be polite in new ways. He sent other men to do math for him, and slept badly when rain came. The judge read the page. He ran his finger under 2 entries and said words about law. He stared at the line where Ames had written the bead pattern, and the X, and the print, and made a face like a man counting, without moving his lips. He wrote a writ that sounded like the land talking in paper. He signed it, and felt for a moment like a boy who had found a way to be the shape he'd wanted. In Mesilla, the printer put out a sheet with a headline you could hear under your boot on Monday. Men in the plaza said the word storm, like it meant something new. Women nodded without smiling. Goats chewed near truth. At Widow's Step, the coal seam cooled and kept a memory of fire, the way a scar keeps a weather report. The bead Losa had turned in her hand became part of a story boys would hear and pretend not to, while they stared at the hole in the fence they were going to crawl through anyway. Bashan lay 3 nights in Ames's spare bed, his breath stubborn, his blood learning a slower pace. He woke on the 2nd night and looked at the ceiling like it was a sky he could stand. He tried to say a name, and didn't. Losa sat in the corner and mended a strap, and did not tell him anything about pride, because the room was full of it already. On the 4th day, he sat up and ate a biscuit that hated teeth, less than it used to. On the 5th, he stood. On the 6th, he walked to the mission yard and did not look at the bell. Dassan did not say his brother's real name. He didn't need to. The boy had signed it in a way a man like Pike couldn't read, and a judge could, and the land had taken the sound back where it keeps things it doesn't use, every day. June Mallory went home on a cold that knew her door. The stove argued, and she won. The page didn't live under her shirt anymore. It lived under a clerk's lock, and a judge's pride, and a printer's ink, and 3 men's whispered shame. She slept one night without counting breaths. She woke with bruises that had decided to be part of her for a while, and a cut on her collarbone that would make the kind of scar a girl touches with 2 fingers, and asks about when she's old enough to choose her own stories. In spring, calves dropped like hard blessings on clean grass. Men came with irons and a new habit of looking at a brand twice before they burned it. Somebody painted over the county seal with a color too close to dried blood. People noticed and said nothing. June took the bead token from the oilcloth and tied it to the inside of her coat, where it would touch her spine when she walked, not as an amulet, as a thing that reminded her the sky can hate a person and not be personal about it. She didn't wear it outside her coat, because that wasn't her right. She kept it where it would count, when no one watched. She met Dassan at Widow's Step on a morning when the coal seam looked like a smile a person should worry about. He came from the high cut, light on his feet because men who choose not to be knives still remember steel. Bashan came with him, slower, but not small. June brought coffee that tasted like a doctor's lie, and bread that didn't. They sat. No speeches. Losa arrived later and set a bowl between them with a stew that had learned to be more from not enough. They ate. The wind went to sleep in a pocket under the rock, and the arroyo, for once, minded itself. Dasan looked at June. "I will owe you until I die," he said simply. "You paid," she said. "More than I asked. More than I'll know." He glanced at his brother, and then back at her. "You asked a different question than men here like to ask. You asked if a person could love a broken man. You answered it with the way you carried a page." June blinked at the coal seam, because it was easier than blinking at a man being the shape you want men to be. "You asked it first," she reminded him. He nodded. "I thought I was the broken man," he said. "I was wrong. We all were. The land does the breaking. We do the loving if we choose." The mule tossed its head, like it understood more than oats. A vulture drew a circle above and decided they weren't today. The bell in the mission had a new brace and a new crack, and would sing with it for a long time. "Viewer," the voice would say, if voices could step out of a place like this. "You listened through flood and rope and paper. Tell us where you're watching from. Hold this with you. Some names you don't say out loud. You write them in the shape a bead makes, and you let that be the mark that changes the judge's math. Next time we walk into the cold spring country, where a mother cut her hair to pay a debt and found it bought a grave instead, come back, and we'll show you the ledger they couldn't burn. They sat until the light broke good across the coal seam and made it look like a thing that could go either way. Then they rose and went toward their separate chores, with a page, now many pages, doing its slow work in rooms where men couldn't lie as